Most of you have probably never heard of this author. His name is Ben Okri. He's a Nigerian poet, novelist, probably considered one of the foremost voices to speak to the reality of those in Africa who've lived through generations of colonialism, civil war, the myriads stuff of suffering that is often experienced in that continent, drought and disease, the many things that have befallen the people of Africa. And one of my favorite poems he wrote is a poem titled An African Elegy. And I'm going to read a few verses from this poem because it expresses the sense of hope, even in the midst of unimaginable suffering. And it starts by saying, "We are the miracles that God made to taste the bitter fruit of time. We are precious. And one day our suffering will turn into the wonders of the earth. There are things that burn me now which turn golden when I'm happy. Do you see the mystery of our pain? That we bear poverty and are able to sing and dream sweet things. And they tell me this life is good. They tell me to live it gently, with fire, and always with hope. There is wonder here." I remember years ago when I came across that poem, I was haunted by it, in part, though, because it came from a very faraway place, yet expressed something so deeply human. It expressed an experience of a life that I could not even imagine, a very different life from my comfortable existence here, my safe existence here that I thank God for here in the first world. And Ben Okri's words capture for me something very important, a sense of hope that I marvel at when I consider that this is written in the devastating poverty and pain and suffering of a number of the African people. His assertion, "We are precious," he says, "and one day our suffering will turn into wonders of the earth." And he asks us, do you see the mystery of our pain, that we bear poverty? And the mystery is that we who bear poverty are able to sing and dream sweet things. And the final lines, I think lines I'd like to live my life by, they tell me that this life is good. And they tell me to live it gently, with fire, always with hope. I like that. Live it gently, with fire, and always with hope. And there is, as one reads that poem, wonder there. And that poem came back to me in part as I read the stories we read this morning, stories rooted in the possibility of hope. Now, I think it's very human nature that when we read the stories of Jesus healing and the amazing, powerful story of lifting those who seem dead to life, it's very natural in our human experience to reflect on why can't that happen for me or for the loved ones around me. That we tend to solely focus on the miracles Jesus performs, his actions bring healing and life even to those dead around him. And it is totally appropriate to ask those questions. It's a part of our being human as we cry out to God in our difficult, challenging times in which we suffer, in which we might be experiencing what is called the pit of Sheol in Jewish literature, the pit of death. Totally appropriate as we express the experience of those, or as we try to wrestle with the experience of those in Jesus' time who encountered Jesus as one who brought healing, who brought life to what was dying. But this morning, what struck me, instead of focusing on Jesus' actions, because in fact, I think this story in many ways is less about what Jesus does than those people who inhabit the story with Jesus. There's Jairus, a father desperate for the life of his child, who comes to Jesus. He's a leader in the synagogue, probably would be frowned upon for going to this itinerant preacher who no one knows anything about, who's doing things he shouldn't be doing, healing the wrong kind of people, eating with the wrong kind of people. And yet Jairus is so desperate, he goes and he prostrates himself and begs for the life of his child. That, if you think about it, is an act of hope. And then there's this woman, we are told, who suffers from bleeding for 12 years. And we're told she suffered a great deal, even as she went doctor to doctor, physician to physician, trying every healing she could possibly get. And she had spent everything she had. Nothing left. That image of physical suffering, poverty. Now, what's less apparent to us these days, maybe, is that it wasn't simply a suffering of physical or economic suffering. The woman's condition would have made her untouchable, a pariah, outside the confines of her society. She would be isolated and alone. We often, many scholars point out that one significant aspect of any healing Jesus does in any of the Gospels, that it's always inclusive. It's always bringing those who were considered outside, bringing them into the community, as if to say it is only being included in the community, only being embraced by the grace of God's love expressed in other human beings, that one finds the possibility of healing and wholeness. And that woman yearns for this, but she is so outside the community. She's hiding in the crowd, anonymous, and so afraid of what would happen, afraid of him denouncing her because she is unclean. As he walks by, she reaches out and, I imagine, touches lightly his clothes. That is an act of hope. Jesus says, "Who touched me?" I kind of thought of my kids when they were little riding in the back of the car. He touched me! However imagined it might have been. But Jesus asks, "Who touched me?" She comes forward and confesses. And what is not self-evident, unless one really looked at the text, the Greek text here, is that Jesus, the story tells us twice, not once, but twice, that because she touched Jesus, she was freed from her suffering. Freed from her suffering. And then right in the next line, right after that, after Jesus finds out who it is, he tells her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." Not me, your faith. And he tells her, "Go in peace," and then he tells her, "You are freed from suffering." Now, there are a couple of things that jump out at me from this story. The first being, it is that the healing in life from death happens because the two main protagonists in this story have hope. Less the actions of Jesus, and more the hope that we can be freed from the suffering. She had enough hope to reach out and touch, and then is freed from suffering. Now, in Buddhism, it is often an assertion that in life we all experience suffering. That in life we all know the pain of grief and of loss. We all know the limitations of our bodies and physical sickness. That in Buddhism, as in the Christian faith, freedom from suffering is only accomplished when one has hope. That hope itself is the cure for suffering. Not that the pain will be taken away, not that we won't experience grief, but that the way in which we meet it is through hope. That in reality, hopelessness is what defines suffering. And I think there's wisdom here for us. As I said, we all experience pain. We cannot get through life without pain and loss. We really wouldn't want to, because that would mean we never truly loved another human being. But it seems to me the challenge, or the story here is pointing out to us, is really the depth of the pit of Sheol, the depth of suffering, happens not simply through the pain, but when we give up hope. Now, it's not that suffering ends. It just means in some ways we are freed from it, less defined by it, and we discover the wonder beyond it. Don't be afraid, Jesus says. Don't give up hope. Just believe. In that final stanza of that song, this idea of hope, the final stanza of that Ben Okri poem sticks with me. And the final stanza is, they tell me that this life is good. They tell me to live it gently, with fire, always with hope. And I'm reminded every time I go down to El Salvador, that as I go down and visit with our brothers and sisters in El Salvador, that more often than not, I may go down there and comprehend the incredible challenges they face, the incredible suffering that I can't imagine in my safe, comfortable life here in Des Moines, Iowa. And that I must confess that there are often times that I feel hopeless. But what strikes me is they never do. Their lives are filled with hope and possibility. And I think Ben Okri has it right. There is wonder here, if we but see it. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.